Okay, thank you, Larry.
All right, thank you very much.
Enjoyed it very much. Enjoyed it very much.
Appreciate it, Commissioner.
Uh-huh.
So that was a great kickoff to today's program. And now we're going to segue into the first panel, which is going to focus on the topic of tackling economic recovery, jobs, and climate change through transmission investment. And Wire sponsored a report done by London Economics International on this topic. And for our discussion today, we're really pleased to welcome, first of all, I'll introduce our moderator, who's Brian Eckhouse, who's a reporter with Bloomberg News. Brian's focus is on a number of areas, including solar, battery storage, the energy transition, and project finance. And increasingly, much to our delight, he is focusing on covering transmission issues as well. Brian's a West Coast transplant from New York, and reportedly, he is a big Mets fan, which I'm trying hard not to hold against him for purposes of this event today. But in addition to Brian, we've got some great panelists to discuss this topic. I'll let Brian talk about them a little bit more, or they can introduce themselves through the course of the program. But we got Aaron Bloom, who's the chair of the System Planning Working Group for the Energy System Integration Group. We have Julia Frayer, who's a managing director at London Economics International, and she's the principal author of the report that I mentioned earlier. And we're also happy to welcome Brennen Cain, who's a policy advisor with the BlueGreen Alliance. We're really interested to hear his perspective from labor and clean energy point of view on some of these issues. So with that, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to get off the screen and let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Larry. As Larry mentioned, I'm Brian Eckhouse. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News in Los Angeles. Cover, as you mentioned, solar, project finance, transmission, the general transition of energy in the US. I'm pleased to be joined by Aaron, Brennen, and Julia. And we'll start off with some opening remarks, starting with Julia to talk about her report. Can't hear you, Julia.
Thank you, Brian. A little technical glitch right from the start. Good morning, everyone. And if I can ask Drew, would it be possible to share? I did prepare one short slide that I thought would be useful as an overlay while I talked for a few minutes. So as Larry mentioned, I think it's up now on the screen. As Larry mentioned, earlier this year, we prepared an economic study that is available for download right off of the Wire's website. Our report contained, I would say, about 3 to 4 important sections or components. We started first with a summary of the current state of labor markets and the economy in the US, and considered the work that is still looming for returning the economy to a steady growth state after the 2020 economic downturn. We also considered the longer term strides that the economy would need to make in order to reach the zero carbon goals that the president has put forward for 2035 for our sector, but also for 2050 for the economy as a whole. The report then went on to consider past events. I always say that if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. That analogy doesn't need to be that negative, because in fact, I think lessons learned from past events when we've suffered economic downturns in the US and undertook policies to recover from those downturns do shine a light on the infrastructure sector and present some very important lessons learned. There are 2 actually today, and I thought I would cover them before I speak to the numbers that you're looking at. I think one of the primary lessons is that governments should seek to encourage private sector spending as they look towards designing economic recovery programs. The private sector spending outlets have been shown to provide a much larger benefit to the overall economy than just direct government spending. The second important lesson learned, and it applies very much so to the transmission sector, is that there needs to be a focus on policies that identify not just immediate opportunities, but also longer term opportunities for the economy, for productivity improvements in labor, but also for effects that last a long time. And it's important that economic stimulus policies aren't short-lived because they can actually cause unintended consequences when they terminate too early in terms of supporting longer-term economic growth. And that's very important in our sector, because when we think about transmission, we don't think about, okay, something can get built in the next 6 months. We think about long-lived projects that take years to develop, plan. As the commissioner just before us noted, these are investments that need to be evaluated by various stakeholders to really be shown to be net beneficial and in the public interest, and that takes time. So we aren't looking to rush into anything, but it also means that policies that support that type of investment also can't require stability. It can't do 90-degree turns or 180-degree about faces, as that really undermines the general time dimension of the industry and what we're talking about. So then in our report, we scanned the opportunities that are present today in the transmission space. And the adjective that I have in mind that I use also in the report is that that opportunity is quite substantial. Just, and it's very conservative, but just on the basis of planned transmission projects that have been part of and identified as part of RTO's transmission status reports and integrated resource plans that have gone through that vetting process with stakeholders, with regulators, just looking at those types of investments and conservatively not including projects outside RTOs that may be, for example, linking and crossing multiple state jurisdictions and linking opportunities that are in that merchant arena. So conservatively, we estimated, based on our review of the US, that there is over $83 billion of such planned transmission project opportunities on the books. About, I would say, 85% of that $83 billion are projects that haven't yet started construction. But if they were to start construction, and they're anticipated to do so in the next 5 to 10 years, they will yield a number of significant benefits, because construction of new infrastructure creates new jobs, stimulates the local economies where construction is occurring. And as you're looking at this slide, we've summarized some of those statistics. And it's not just construction itself, the installation of those transmission projects, but it's also the underlying industries that support the transmission sector, the equipment vendors that create the components that go into a transmission project. And actually also, this isn't just about new transmission lines that need new rights of way. This is also about rebuilds of existing transmission infrastructure that is aged and requires a refresh. It's also equipment upgrades to meet planning requirements and approved grid enhancement elements as well. So those numbers will create boosts to the local GDP of about $42 billion. And that's really because of the direct local spending of about $39 billion. 2/3 of that $39 billion and the resulting $42 billion and the resulting 400,000 plus jobs is related to the actual installation. And I have a report, in the report I have a map that shows the diversity and location of these projects. But generally speaking, these dollars are distributed across the entire US geographical landscape. So they're not limited just to a particular part of the country. They are also not limited to a particular sector. These benefits accrue to many sectors of the economy, not just utilities and construction industry. And that's one of the reasons that even in the past we saw a lot of economic recovery programs focus around infrastructure. Infrastructure begets benefits that are quite wide in terms of their distribution across the economy. And once these projects are built, we expect significant benefits to continue. One form of benefits, financial benefits, is the additional jobs that are created to maintain those assets. And we've estimated about 9,000 permanent jobs, and that's a very conservative estimate based on our metrics and approach. And an additional 1.6 billion in GDP improvements on an annual year after year basis. With respect to, I was going to just add one more point. With respect to also longer term, and this is quite important to highlight, and this is the green area of the chart, we are also expecting significant other indirect effects. And those indirect effects are probably even larger than the economic stimulus that we've measured here. Because transmission projects, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this quite a bit later today, also support then generation investment, renewable energy investment. They support economic policy, which will reduce significant estimated damage from climate change if it continues as it has in the past, and it will reduce electricity utility bills for consumers. And I'll end here and pass the baton.
Thanks, Julia. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks. Glad to be here. So my name is Aaron Bloom, and I work on connecting energy with wires and software. So my day job is over at NextEra Analytics. We're the data science division, and I work on energy management systems there. But I also have a volunteer role with the Energy Systems Integration Group, which is an educational nonprofit that understands the technical challenges presented by transitioning the power system to be lower carbon and continually lower cost and with high levels of reliability. And one of the things that we did last fall was analyze the leading research on really high levels of clean energy and what are the commonalities between the various studies that have been done. In my prior life, I worked at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and ran the Interconnection SEAM study, where we evaluated the benefits of joining together large portions of the country with transmission lines. And the conclusions as you look across this body of work is that there's really two challenges associated with getting to very high levels of renewable energy. There's a balancing challenge and there's an inverter-based challenge. And the balancing challenge is, how do you make sure that you can balance supply and demand at a variety of timescales, whether that's the moment-to-moment variations of a passing cloud or over interannual variability when you have a windy year or a sunnier year. And so those are the big balancing challenges, but there's another challenge that's presented for power systems planners when they're looking at these very high levels of renewable generation, and that's the inverter-based challenge, which has to do with the ability to maintain system frequency in light of a disturbance and continue to keep the system up and running. So a synchronous machine works by spinning and has rotational inertia. This provides a lot of benefit in your recovery from an event. Wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries, they're not rotating machines. So they have different profiles and need different control systems in order to help the system ride through this. So these are the two major challenges, and these challenges are framed within the reference of just how much renewable capacity needs to be added to reach very high clean energy goals. So right now we have probably around 200 gigawatts of renewable energy in the United States. And we probably need to go to at least 2,000 gigawatts of renewable capacity in the United States. So, more than an order of magnitude in reality. And so that's going to require a lot of big thinking. And the conclusions from the leading research is that transmission is critical to reaching that goal. There's a variety of configurations of transmission that are probably helpful. You can imagine a lot of rolled up regional approaches that are very well coordinated that could result in the type of scale deployment that's necessary to reach high levels of clean energy. But you could also imagine some other, coordinated national approaches as well. And so kind of figuring out that path, I think, is going to be really interesting. And we're seeing a lot of changing opinions and thoughts in Washington about how are we going to coordinate the massive transmission build out needed to get to these very high levels of clean energy. So that's what we've been thinking a lot about at ESIG. There's all sorts of technical details that we can get into that are available on our website. And if you guys want to reach out or ask questions, I'd be happy to talk more.
Thanks, Aaron. And over to Brennen.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Brennen Cain. I'm a policy advisor with BlueGreen Alliance. We are a national partnership of labor unions and environmental organizations. It's our belief that Americans shouldn't have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment. We can and should do both. The London Economic Report really showcases the importance of building a national transmission plan that not only scales up our infrastructure to accommodate the renewable energy deployment necessary to meet our climate goals, but also shows the importance of making a national transmission plan a tool for economic recovery. We agree and believe that this recovery can and must support family-sustaining jobs across the economy. BGA believes that the transition to a clean energy economy should be through maximizing the benefits of job growth in the clean energy or the clean technology sectors, specifically for workers and communities disproportionately impacted by pollution, deindustrialization, and jobs from loss of incumbent energy. So as folks on this webinar know, the science is very unambiguous about the threat of climate change, and strong federal, state, local, and private investment is certainly needed to meet our climate goals. We have to get to net zero emissions by 2050 and ensure that we are on that path solidly by 2030. Clean energy investments and infrastructure will be central to accomplishing these goals. And a very large part of that equation is building out transmission, storage, and increased renewable deployment through congressional and regulatory action. So whether it's through connecting new solar farms, offshore wind, onshore wind, energy storage facilities, or building out electric vehicle transition or electric vehicles charging stations, transmission connectivity and new interregional projects will be a staple to achieving those goals. We know that the increased demand for renewable energy means that we have to increase our current transmission capacity. And as Aaron noted, we need to go beyond what we currently have by about 2 to 3 times our current load capacity to meet these renewable goals. We can do this by building a macro grid that connects new clean energy projects. At the same time, we want to ensure that these jobs that are created through these investments are high quality union jobs. One way we can do this is by tying federal dollars going towards infrastructure projects, including new transmission and maintenance of existing lines, to tying those to strong labor standards, such as prevailing wage, registered apprenticeship utilization, and local hire provisions. So for example, Chairman Wyden's Clean Energy for America Act, which recently passed the Senate Finance Committee, established new clean energy tax credits for renewable energy deployment, while also requiring labor standards like prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship. These provisions ensure that the new jobs created in the clean energy economy are family sustaining and increase opportunity for historically marginalized communities. Higher labor standards not only increase job quality for workers on these projects, but new modeling from Princeton University shows that they don't actually cause significant increase for the overall cost of a project. In fact, hiring union labor often leads to higher productivity, quality work, and safety standards on job sites. This bill also incentivizes domestic content utilization, or Buy America. Ensuring these components used in these projects support American jobs can help revitalize American manufacturing. So domestic content utilization ensures that that federal dollars going to public works projects utilize domestic supply chains. In the context of renewable energy, this means domestic manufacturers and workers are producing the clean energy technology components that support clean energy deployment. This accomplishes both the need for renewable energy deployment and supports manufacturers and high quality domestic jobs. As noted in the report, a strong private investment in the transmission development will be central to meeting our climate goals. BGA would like to work with developers, utility commissions, and other partners to ensure that these jobs are family sustaining and that the workers have the opportunity to join a union. One way to ensure that these jobs are high road is through the use of project labor agreements and community workforce agreements, PLAs or CWAs, which are pre-hire agreements with one or more labor organization that establishes sort of the terms and conditions of employment for a specific construction project. PLAs, they offer increased wages and benefits for workers, cost savings, and safety standards for project developers, and as Julia noted, create sort of a downstream effect for these communities that are involved in transmission projects. So thankfully, transmission, distribution, and storage sectors as a whole have a better than average unionization numbers for projects compared to other energy sectors. Historically, transmission projects utilize a high percentage of unionized labor, And as a whole, 17% of workers in transmission, distribution, and storage belong to a labor or union organization. This is a great starting point for the future of the National Transmission Plan. Also outlined in the report is the need for a strong federal investment for new transmission lines. We are encouraged so far by the bipartisan framework agreed upon by the Senate yesterday, putting $73 billion towards transmission, as well as the transmission ITC legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate. BGA also supports revitalizing the Smart Grid Investment Grant Program, increasing funding for energy storage program, and Smart Grid Research and Development Program. We are encouraging and would like to continue to see sort of the track record of strong partnerships between private sector utilities and labor organizations. So it's, in closing, it's BGA's belief that a significant investment in transmission and a robust national transmission policy can be central to achieving our climate goals and provide consumers with affordable, clean energy while creating family-sustaining jobs. So thank you for having me on the panel. Really appreciate it, and I'll pass it back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Brennen. So we'll come in a minute to the infra bill that Brennen just referenced, but let's start with a very broad question for all the panelists. What is the state of play for the system in this country right now? How would each of you assess the state of the country's power grids? Aaron, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I would say that the power grid is ripe for large-scale transformation, and there's a lot of things that are going in the right direction. And with a few, say, select nudges, we can probably really get into overdrive. And I think transmission, building it to where we think renewable resources are going to come out, that's a big part of it. And trying to unite different jurisdictions based on their common goals, that's going to be how we get there quickly. So I think I'm probably more excited about the prospects of a clean energy future and large transmission expansion than ever before.
Brennen?
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I would add that building out these transmission lines, interregional transmission lines, is going to be vital to sort of making the state of our power grid a lot more successful. There are all these places that are producing renewable energy right now that often are not the consumers of that energy, and increasing that connectivity to deliver power to places that don't have the capacity for massive solar farms, offshore wind, onshore wind farms is going to be vital. So optimistic, I think.
Got it. Julia?
I once heard somebody describe our current transmission network as the biggest modern wonder one of the biggest modern wonders we've ever seen, the biggest machine ever built. And it does do amazing things. It probably is being asked these days to do more things than it was ever intended to do 30 to 40 years ago. And because of that, I think it requires a very thoughtful approach. As an economist, I always worry about the unintended consequences. And so maybe I'm a bit of a pessimist as well in that regard. To balance off Aaron's optimism, I've got a little bit of a pessimism that we need to actually make progress instead of talk about just progress. On these infrastructure investments, they have served us extremely well. We have a very reliable electricity system, especially when we think about the transmission system. But I think we need to do more if we want to actually make the goals, policy level goals. If you think about it, 2035 is less than 15 years away as we stand here today. And it usually takes a good 5 to 10 years from start of design to actual construction to build transmission infrastructure and bring it online. I've worked on projects over my career that haven't yet been constructed fully, even though they were very beneficial to begin with, continue to be beneficial. There are generally a lot of administrative and permitting and siting issues that arise that just take a long time to resolve. And I think we need to move very quickly if we're going to meet those policy goals that have been put before us. They are achievable, but they're going to take a lot of coordinated work.
Got it. You just mentioned a tinge of pessimism. And, I want to ask all you guys this question, but I'll start with Julia. In terms of the grid, or in terms of potential impacts on stimulus or economic recovery, what would happen if the projects that are in the queue right now continue to struggle as they have before?
I think the way to think about it is we're giving up opportunities that we would otherwise, great opportunities that we would otherwise have. Projects, if you talk to transmission developers, they're very resilient folks. They don't give up just because something isn't moving forward. They double down and work pretty hard on it, and they have a lot of patience. The problem is that it means that the benefits we could have today, the $42 billion in GDP boost, which is significant dollars, don't happen in the next 5 years. Maybe they'll happen sometime in the future, but we give up that opportunity to help the current generation of workers and the population and taxpayers with these benefits. I think that's that is both an opportunity and a risk at the same time, depending on if your cup is half full or half empty.
Got it. Aaron, how about for the grid? What happens if these large-scale projects that have been in the works for often for 10 years that have stagnated or struggled don't move forward? What does it mean for the grid?
Yeah, I think what it does is it slows down the transition, and it makes every additional megawatt that you add of clean energy more expensive to do. And so I think that we need some common sense approaches to dealing with the queue problem. I think the queue problem is a symptom of a lack of coordinated planning being deployed at a scale that matters. It's not just about coordinating with the system next to you. We need multi-regional planning because of the interconnectivity of the power systems and our markets. So the wires kind of haven't caught up with the technology, I would say. And so we need to go do that. And we need to build out at such a large scale that the projects that we're talking about today are just the start of it, right? I think 83 is a very, that would be a great, amount of investment. We probably need something like 150 billion in investment in the transmission sector to get to these really ambitious goals. And so, yeah, it's just delaying the transition right now.
When you were talking, Brennen was nodding the entire time, so I'm sure you want to echo what Aaron just said, Brennen.
Yeah, and I think that the downstream effects of delaying and having these long queues for projects also affects not only the jobs that are going to go into building these new projects, but also the delay of new and future clean energy projects that also have large numbers of jobs associated with them, which in turn impacts those communities in which those jobs are going to be created in when building out massive renewable infrastructure.
Got it.
If I can jump in maybe on the tail end too, just to kind of circle back, I would say also there's a huge opportunity cost, which we're living through these days with climate change. So delaying the infrastructure delays our success at getting to curbing those significant property damages, health damages, damages to our economy. And those total, we know from experience now, if you look at some of the awfully harmful climate related events that have happened in our country in just the last couple of years, we know those are millions upon millions, maybe billions of dollars if you start to add up those separate events. So that's an important problem too, because carbon emissions is not something that gets reset every year. You start from zero and you see if you get into dangerous, it adds up cumulatively.
Got it. Aaron, what are the projects that are in, or the types of projects that are in the queue right now? I know there's a diversity of projects. What are they? Are they more localized? Are they large scale, mix of both?
I think what we're seeing is a lot of different projects thrown in a lot of different places where they're just trying to find access. So finding the land, finding where the wind blows and where the sun shines, those are the first order things, but the thing that's really dominating it is where can I get in on the network? And I'd say there was originally a push to the exceptionally high quality wind and solar resources, but that network has largely been filled up with existing projects. And to add more in those regions of the country, you need massive increases in the transmission network. And so because we don't have that, we're seeing lower quality sites be developed with more interesting configurations and layouts. And they're just struggling to find that place to interconnect. So we're seeing it spread out. We're seeing the the network get used more and more, I would say, at a variety of capacity factors, which has some benefits in terms of diversity, but it slows down the scale of our deployment.
Got it. And Julia, like, how do you evaluate the economic impact of like a localized project, like maybe from New Jersey to Manhattan versus one that might go from like Kansas to Illinois? How do you compare those projects? Big scale difference, obviously.
I don't think in this industry it's this one or that one. It's not a question of either or. It's really a question of, does that project in the sense of what we're expecting for the future create its own benefits, which may affect a different constituency, a different set of beneficiaries, but does it create benefits? Benefits for consumers, benefits for the economy, benefits for the environment, and the scale might be very different. The focus might be very different, but just because we may be approving a project that is between PJM and New York ISO doesn't mean that that somehow undermines the benefits of a project in the Midwest between SPP and MISO, as just kind of examples of it. I think the same idea also goes, I think it's all about complements when we talk transmission versus the renewables. Many folks think, oh, lots of renewables, every rooftop will have a solar panel, we don't need transmission. And I think that is a myth that has probably grown too big and is on very shaky facts, because in fact, it is a combined system that we're trying to create here.
But like, when you consider the $83 billion that you mentioned earlier, is a big chunk of that like the big scale projects, the long distance projects, or do the smaller projects also have a big economic impact?
The $83 billion is composed of a variety of projects. I would actually suggest that it's not including the really large distance-wise projects that are, going from one market to the other. It's a very conservative figure, but it is, I would say, primarily right now being driven by aging infrastructure, reliability, a little bit with the need to interconnect, but it doesn't have and this is why I called it a very conservative figure. It doesn't yet have that overlay where you're also incorporating beneficial ideas about really managing climate change, managing accessing generation that is currently in very remote areas and not interconnectable. And maybe if I can add, there's a great lesson learned from that respect. Folks in our industry marvel at the success of the offshore wind industry in other countries. But they don't realize that there was a lot being done to support that offshore wind industry development in those other countries. The UK is a great example. About 10 years ago, I spent time over there working through and thinking about what to do with transmission access. And in fact, if you talk to some of the wind developers out there, as well as the policymakers, the fact that they have seen a significant reduction in offshore wind project cost is credited to the fact that transmission interconnection has been completely de-risked there in the way that they've managed their planning side and also their financing side of the transmission equation. So we can learn from some of our neighbors across the pond, or across both ponds, I guess, in what they're doing with transmission infrastructure planning to support the renewable opportunities.
Julie, you kind of referenced the idea about like it's been out there, for a long time, but it's kind of sort of been put back in the discourse about transmission versus rooftop distributed. How critical is transmission to meeting the Biden 2035 goals? Clean grid by 2035. Can it be just transmission? Can it be just rooftop? How do you juggle those two things?
I think you see a lot of negative shaking heads on this thing. I think you need all of the above. You need to support distributed energy resources, but I would have to say that with a solar panel on my house, I can't live without the grid still. There are times I don't have energy coming from my solar panels and I need to function, and I can't function without electricity. So the wider benefits of a reliable transmission network cannot be overlooked for consumers. I think we need everything, all of the above, although we want to choose wisely what features of everything we want. So it needs to be an efficient economic everything, not just I'm going on a shopping spree everything.
Brennen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of the above is very true. I would echo Julia's point of we need to be smart with what all of the above means, and that we want to make sure that while we are still using incumbent energy sources that maybe have carbon capture offsets or something of the like, are still being scaled down in the way that meet our climate goals.
Aaron, you mentioned earlier 2 gigawatts will be needed. That's a big number. If we put panels on every roof in this country, is that 2 gigawatts, or do you still need to have big projects that rely on new transmission projects?
So we need 2 terawatts, right? So
2 terawatts.
More than that, right? So
Thank you.
So, solar on as many suitable roofs as we possibly can. Yes, that's what we need to do. That's not going to be enough in and of itself. We're still going to need large scale generation, and that's because we need to balance weather systems, right? It's not just about the passing clouds or the changing winds, it's about the changing seasons and the evolving weather patterns. And we haven't even done much research across the community on how the climate will change and what that will mean for the weather and the wind and the solar generation. So we need to understand that better. But I wanted to talk about, one other item is that all these technologies work better together. They work better together from a technical point of view, but also from a market point of view. And I think that's how you do it smart, right? By having transparent markets and price signals at the retail and the wholesale level that's facilitated through robust interconnections at the distribution and transmission level, you can reach these goals in an efficient manner. And this sounds like motherhood and apple pie. That's only because it is, right? Like, we know what it takes to go get there from a technical point of view. What we need is the policy directions and the signals and the gumption to go do it, because I think the path is pretty clear from a technical point of view.
You mentioned gumption. I'm curious what your thoughts about the state of the infra bill in the Senate. What is in it from the point of view of transmission, and are you optimistic about its ultimate passing?
I don't spend enough time looking at infrastructure bills these days, I'll tell you that. So kind of keen to hear from others on that one. So we'll see.
Julia?
I think that policy, and I haven't reviewed the bill in detail, so I'll start with a disclaimer. I do think policy support for this industry is very important, but I think it doesn't lie just with legislation. We also need regulatory support for this industry, and we need stability, because this is not an industry where you don't worry because rules change, because you've recovered your investment capital in the next 9 months or 6 months. The recovery timeframes on these investments is longer term, and you need stability in the underlying rules on transmission allocation, on permitting, on even planning processes themselves to really get us to the right rhythm in investment. And I'm hoping policymakers on Capitol Hill can support in a positive way the regulatory environment that we need for this. I'm not sure that is definitely addressed in the bill, but I think we're starting to see progress at the Commission in thinking through some of these difficult issues.
Got it. We spoke earlier about how big projects, large-scale projects, have struggled to move forward for a long time. Julie, you mentioned that they're often like 5 to 10-year projects, even without much of a struggle, just given the lead time, building, permitting, everything. There's been a lot of talk about transition in the last several months, particularly since Biden came into office. Are you all more confident we'll see these projects? And if so, why?
Well, I will have to say that I tend to think of infrastructure investment like this slightly apolitically, agnostically, because they are there before politics change, and they will continue, if they're beneficial, they will continue to be there on our radar. But there are a lot of boxes to check off. And sometimes I feel like the magnitude of those boxes, because of the magnitude of dollars and implications, does cause us to be on a slow path to these investments. But I hope that the political support will just only be helpful. We're not asking for, I don't think it makes sense to ask for the federal government to start building transmission here in this country. The private sector has done very well building transmission, owning transmission, financing transmission. But I think it is useful to ask for political support to complement what the private sector is capable of doing in this country to support transmission investment. And I hope that that is coming through with Biden's plans.
Aaron, any thoughts about this in terms of, like, if you're more confident now than you were maybe a couple of years ago about these projects that may have stagnated for a long time moving forward, and if so, why?
Yeah, I think I am more excited for them because we're hearing about them at a scale that matters. At a national level, people are talking about the importance of transmission. And I'd say there's this opportunity where we've been deliberating over the engineering and what the benefits are for a lot of years now. We have a good record built, and I think it's time for some bold action to just say, let's go build it.
From the point of view of the states, for example, though, do you feel the states are on board? Like, if the federal government's saying, hey, we want to really invest in our grids, are the states on board for ones that lines that might go across states that don't directly benefit? Do you feel that there is coordination across the federal system?
They need to figure out how to get to the same common point with the states and how they can work together and how they can see benefits. In a really high renewables future, you're going to be building practically everywhere of all sorts of different resources. So every region is going to benefit in some way proportionate to their contribution or impact on the system. So I'd say you can't force it down anybody's throat. You need the states and the utilities at the table. There needs to be a coalition of the willing that goes forward towards this goal.
But is that happening right now? Is there coordination? Is it enough?
No, I don't think there's enough right now, but I think there's the energy behind it and the realization that we need to do more.
Interesting. Let's go to jobs for a little bit. Brent, we talked about labor jobs could benefit. What kind of jobs specifically would be created if the country embarks on a major boom of new power lines?
I mean, the first and foremost is the actual construction that goes into creating these new lines. It also entails bringing along the folks who are manufacturing a number of these components that goes into new transmission lines. And, that is sort of a cross section of a number of different type of laborers, from utility workers to the IBEW, to, the building trades. Each component of a new transmission line has a number of different jobs that are associated with it. And then sort of the downstream effect are the folks that are then supported in the communities that are a part of these or adjacent to these new transmission lines that are supplying workers. So, I mean, construction is the first, one that comes to mind, but then also afterwards, and Julia can maybe speak a little bit more to this, but the operation and maintenance of these lines and retooling existing lines will also be a massive boon for jobs.
Julia?
I think the job effect follows very closely the direct spending. So, and we like to call it kind of a multiplier effect, or another way to think about it, the drop in the water effect. You start with $1, but that $1 travels because you pay the construction worker, but the construction worker needs to go and buy some groceries, perhaps purchase a home or rent a home, and purchase other services and products for their lifestyle, for their household, and that trickles throughout the economy. And that's what we want to see. We want to see this spending, this private sector spending, really reach as far across the economy as possible. I do think that the O&M spending tends to be more concentrated in the utility sector, but even those 9,000 jobs we've estimated that are very conservative will mean those households will go and spend on purchase goods and services to support their to support themselves, and that money will go out to the rest of the economy. I think that there's a rising concern for things like environmental justice and economic justice to make sure that the benefits do affect as many people as possible. I think infrastructure investment is a pathway to get that result, because it does allow for a much wider net of beneficiaries from that private sector investment. It's not going to be concentrated in just a particular geographical area or a particular segment of the population.
Got it. Brennen, are unions lobbying the federal government? Are they lobbying states on these projects? What level of engagement are you seeing or are you involved with to advocate for new power lines?
So I think the lobbying comes, or rather the engagement from labor unions comes with individual projects. When those projects are planned and have approval and are shovel ready, then the negotiations between local labor organizations sort of then takes hold. Where we are focusing our efforts is making sure that the federal investment that is going into these projects, if it's the Biden's plan with $73 billion in the infrastructure bill, or with the investment tax credit that's in Chairman Biden's bill, what we're pushing for is making sure that those federal dollars have labor standards attached to them, and making sure that the optionality for unions and for labor on the ground is available.
Got it. We've talked a little bit today about economic recovery and stimulus. We haven't mentioned the word COVID or coronavirus. Julia, how big a factor do you think COVID is in terms of the prospects of new clean power projects, whether it's solar, wind, transmission, batteries?
So we are hearing that the aftermath of COVID's disruption on the global economy and on the supply chains is still a little bit with us, and it does affect our sector to some degree as well. But I am very confident that that is a temporary question of just reassessing the opportunities. No, I don't think there's any sector of the economy that has been immune from the implications on labor, implications on equipment, inputs that go into manufacturing and producing. But frankly, in the electricity sector, that was truly a well-defined portion of the economy that had to continue to operate safely and reliably throughout the process and crisis. And I think it did so. I think that the biggest issue really from a COVID effect issue is the supply constraints that have happened on some of the equipment and to some degree on the labor, but it'll work itself out.
Got it. Aaron, you mentioned earlier the SEAM study. Want to walk us through what it is and what it's sort of pushing for or advocating?
Yeah, so the SEAM study was an engineering study to try to evaluate what is the benefit of joining together the country's two major power systems, the Eastern Interconnection and the Western Interconnection, with large-scale transmission. We looked at a variety of configurations, kind of a small, medium, and large approach. And in all cases, you build an awful lot of AC transmission network build-outs across the eastern United States and in the West Coast. But we saw that there's an awful lot of value to joining together the Eastern and Western interconnection to help out with seasonal and inter-hourly variability in the power system. And this was probably one of the first studies that looked at it. One of the hallmarks of it was a transmission overlay called the macro grid, which was several lines that crisscross the country and allow large-scale shipping of energy. We showed that there was a lot of benefits to that from an economic perspective, cost-benefit ratios of about 2.8 to 3.0 in 30 years. And these would be assets that would stick around for a very long time. So the benefits would continue for quite a long time into the future. So I think that study really started a little bit of a national dialogue again about what is the role of large-scale transmission. what does it mean to be joining multiple regions instead of just next door neighbors? And how do we need to be thinking about where renewable energy is going and how the load is evolving in the future?
It's a good segue to the recent push by FERC to overhaul the rules for transmission. Any thoughts on any of the three of you on that push?
Well, I can start, and I would say that the areas that some of FERC's focus definitely need improvement. They're looking again at interconnection planning through the advanced NOPR that they opened up just a few weeks ago, and I think those are areas that need modernization, if you will, and review. Cost allocation, which is a very touchy subject. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's something if we don't talk about, we won't solve. So it does need that attention. It needs a solution. It doesn't need to be sidestepped. And I believe that is also on FERC's radar. I do think that I'm, again, my pessimism, I think it's in my character. I'm also sometimes worried when there are ideas that pop up in the regulatory forefront, and they may sound on one dimension really interesting and useful, but I would say that I'm always worried about the longer term unintended consequences, because these are dynamic industries. You can't make a conclusion that this is going to always work just by looking at a slice of the status quo today. And so I definitely would urge FERC and some of the other things that they're looking at, like ROE policies, to tread very carefully because of unintended consequences.
Aaron, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think the thing that's most exciting to me about the ANOPR were the questions on renewable energy zones and the acknowledgement that CREZ was the most successful transmission activity, and at least I think that's how I interpret it, for building out lots of renewables, and it made a lot of sense, and everybody agrees that you'd probably just go do that again bigger. And I think we need to expand that philosophy and way of thinking across the country, looking at the cues to say, hey, where do we see consensus about where the resource is and where landowners are probably willing to site renewables? And then how do we build large-scale transmission starting soon and getting steel in the ground that moves us on that path?
Got it. I have one last question I'm going to turn to Brennen on, and then we'll turn it back to Larry in case he has any follow-ups to add on. We talked a lot about jobs today, and the jobs that might be created from building new power lines, which would then potentially support new solar and wind farms, creating more jobs. But there are folks that say, hey, if you're going to spend all this money and attention on building new solar, wind, batteries, transmission, you might have folks that have coal jobs and other kind of traditional energy jobs. How do you reconcile those two things? This desire to create new jobs through clean power, but also it may hurt people that work in coal or other industries?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's one that I think there are a lot of answers to that sometimes are uncomfortable realizations that policy or regulation aside, there are economic forces that are moving us away from incumbent energy sectors. And so, I think maybe two parts is, one, these jobs, as Julia stated, are going to be sort of geographically dispersed across the country. And then the second point is that we are supportive and actively working on legislation that would invest in coal communities that are seeing retirements or slated for retirement, or other areas that are already deindustrialized, to either retool existing power plants, retool existing manufacturing plants, to make sure that those folks have access to jobs down the line or currently when they have been let go from their coal or natural gas job. And so I think, the investment is, we need to keep going forward with our renewable goals, but at the same time, we can invest back in sort of these coal communities and deindustrialized communities. Specifically, we're working on an amendment that was included in the Chairman Wyden's Clean Energy for America Act that was a investment tax credit for deindustrialized communities. So it works in a similar way that the ITC or other renewable tax credit goes, where developers go into coal communities or scheduled retirements for coal facilities, and actually invest in retooling and providing economic support for these communities.
And there's great examples of this actually working really well, the whole retraining educational aspects. We've seen closed coal plant facilities being used for new technology development. Out in the West, I've been working on a project with a new energy storage technology that will use some of the geological sites on a retired coal facility to do new energy storage. We are seeing some of the retired coal sites across the East Coast, which tend to be placed along deep harbors, being reused for interconnection points for offshore wind, and also landing areas for developing of local industry to support the construction of offshore wind facilities. So there's an opportunity, if we put our heads to it, to try to revive these communities and give an opportunity to the local labor to move with, I guess, technology and innovation into something related that they can relate to, but something different from what they may have been doing for the last 30, 40 years.
Thanks, everybody. Larry, do you have any questions or things you want to weigh in on?
Well, thanks, Brian. I think this has been a really great conversation. I think it's been great how it kind of focuses on the value of transmission and transmission investment for a number of reasons, just in terms of trying to address the climate goals that have been set either by the states or the federal government, and then the benefits that flow from transmission investment, whether it's those family supporting, good paying jobs that Brennen was talking about that they're looking to promote, or the impact generally on the economy. I guess one question I'll have just to close it out, because we're almost at the end of the time for this session, and it builds upon some of what we heard with Commissioner Christie's comments earlier. He raised some concerns about the viability of long distance projects, particularly where there may be more questionable issues surrounding need, and how you go about demonstrating that. He talked a lot about the role of state commissions in this process and the importance that they play. From my perspective, everything that we've been seeing in terms of studies shows that we're going to need an amount of investment in transmission unlike anything we've ever seen before over the course of the next decade or two, if we're going to meet the goals that have been set. So incredibly ambitious. But at the same time, it's clear, not everybody is pulling on the oar with the same amount of strength and in the same direction. I guess I'm just curious for the three of you, how concerned are you about that aspect of what we're facing as we try to go about building out the grid to meet these needs over the next decade or so?
I'm worried about it. We need somebody that can kind of coordinate and observe and see everything that's coming together. I'm hopeful that that's something that could come out of FERC or something maybe out of DOE that can just at least roll up a lot of these regional studies into something that could be like a national view on it. I think that's really important.
I will jump in, and I would say that first, I'm not surprised that not everybody is rowing in the same direction and as strongly. I think we have that issue anytime that that there are multiple stakeholders involved. I do think that instead of ignoring that, it might be useful to think a little bit more about it. Are there incentives we could give to stakeholders to try to row in the same direction and rethink how we think about the benefits and who are benefiting and who then pays for transmission. I think that probably will go a long way to at least giving transparency to the situation. We need to follow the benefits, and the benefits need to be very completely and exhaustively analyzed. As the commissioner said, if you don't have a beneficial project, then you shouldn't be pursuing it. But you need to be confident that you do in order to then give your full backing to it. And I think sometimes there's a lot of miscommunication or inadequacy of understanding among some stakeholders about those benefits.
So to maybe answer the question of how do we get folks to row in the same direction at the same time, we are working, both at the federal and also the state level. We have affiliates in a number of different states, and just for example, in Colorado, where they recently passed a very large clean energy bill that has transmission-related policy in it, and it also has labor standards in it. And so from our perspective, we are working both at the federal and the state level to ensure that the priorities of lining up high-quality labor or high-quality jobs with labor optionality is happening both at the federal and the state level. And so, I think we are confident that from pressing at a number of different angles, both at the federal, state, and then sort of individual stakeholder level, we're hopefully going in the right direction.
Well, great. Brian, I want to thank you for moderating this panel. I got to comment, I like your bookcase. It looks like you have a crown above your head from what we're seeing. So I got to get myself
a big basket, yes.
But I also want to thank Julia, Brennen, and Aaron for participating in the panel today. I think it was a really great discussion, and appreciate hearing your perspectives on this issue. So with that, we're going to transition out from panel one. Thank them very much for their participation in today's program. I'm going to go ahead. We'll take about a minute or so to let the panelists for panel two join in. I had originally planned on having a bit of a break, but I think we're going to keep on moving forward. If we can get everybody on board. I think we've got everybody here already. They're all anxious to join in on this issue. It's a phenomenal and incredibly timely topic, talking about the issues surrounding federal and state coordination, of which there probably really aren't any, so I expect this will be a really short conversation with a lot of agreement, but I'm being tongue-in-cheek, of course. I think this is a really timely panel. It follows right on the heels back in June of FERC initiating different efforts to focus on engagement with the states on some of the issues that we're dealing with in the energy sector, but certainly plenty of them are in the transmission sector, as we heard earlier from Commissioner Christie and on the last panel. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our moderator for today's panel. It's Jodi Moskowitz. Jodi is the Deputy General Counsel and RTO Strategy Officer for PSEG, and she is also an officer within WIRES. I had the great pleasure of working with Jodi for a few years during my time at PSEG. She's a pleasure to deal with, and she's an expert on federal and state regulatory matters involving transmission. And we've got a fantastic all-star panel lined up for today's discussion. We have Jennifer Murphy, who's Director in Energy Policy and a Senior Counsel with NARUC. We have Sue Glatz, who's Director in Strategic Initiatives and Interregional Planning at PJM. And then we also have Abe Silverman, who I also had the pleasure of working with many years ago, back when both he and I were at FERC. Abe is now the General Counsel at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. So I think we've got a great panel to discuss these issues. I want to mention to our attendees that you have the opportunity to submit questions for any of our panelists, again, by using the question function on the GoToWebinar control panel. If you go ahead and submit those questions, I can relay them back into the group when we get later on into the discussion. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jodi, let her do any initial introductions for the topics that we've got, and take it off from there.
Sure. Thanks, Larry. Thanks for the kind words as well. And good morning, everyone. Excited about moderating this panel today. As Larry noted, it's very timely, this topic of federal state coordination and collaboration. The first panel hit some of the issues and started talking about this, but I think this panel will drill down into these issues, and we have exactly the right people to do it. So I'm going to really turn it over to the three of you to briefly introduce yourselves and make any introductory opening remarks that you'd like to make on the topic, and then we'll get into some specific questions. So I'm looking on my screen right now. Abe, maybe we'll start with you, if you don't mind.
Of course, I'm happy to. And thanks so much for the invite today. And it is hard to imagine a more timely topic, a more timely time to be talking about this topic as we look at, FERC stepping out with their A-NOPR, talking about the really touching a lot of third rails at the same time, or at least proposing to. It's just so interesting. And I come at this from the perspective of a state regulator, from a state with a pretty profound commitment to clean energy. We have a mandate to install 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind in the next decade. And at the same time, we're also rolling out a very ambitious solar program, which is also creating, a lot of the transmission and interconnection and distribution level issues that we're all talking about. And I sort of come at this also thinking about, I just love history. And when I look at the transmission build out that we're talking about, to meet our clean energy challenge, we're really talking about the most profound transmission expansion since rural electrification in this country. And we're talking about really for the first time taking the grid since then, taking the grid to places where it isn't at the moment, and whether that be off the eastern seaboard or to renewably constrained areas that don't have a robust transmission system at the moment. So just a couple of thoughts though. As we sort of take on this really Herculean challenge, one is that fiscal prudence is good transmission policy. I can't emphasize enough. We have to do this at a price that consumers can afford. And so, when we're faced with the prospect of, putting in a proposal that either makes more money or is anti-competitive and drives up cost, that is anti-transmission. And excessive cost will kill this transmission revolution just as surely as siting issues can. The second is that there is enormous untapped power between federal and state regulators. And I don't just mean the FERC task force, the joint one at the moment. I'm also talking about states collaborating with PJM. And I just have to throw a massive shout out to Sue Glatz and her team at PJM. I mean, we are doing this offshore wind transmission planning here in New Jersey, looking at a transmission first approach through the state agreement approach with PJM. And we could not do it. We would not be where we are in the process of less than a month, seeing proposals from a host of different transmission developers for how best to tackle this offshore wind challenge without Sue and her team really being there, walking hand in hand with us every step of the way. And I would love to see that be the default across the country and not sort of the exception. The third is, I just, as powerful as state agreement approach is, states can't be expected to take on this burden alone. We really need to be working with our fellow states and collaborators. And the last thing I'll just mention is, you all shouldn't be reading this presentation today. You should be looking at the ISAC report that PJM just issued, looking at how states across PJM meet their offshore wind and other RPS requirements, and what does that transmission build out look like? As we sit here, looking out into the future 5 or 10 years, that kind of holistic planning where PJM is working with the states to accommodate state programs and looking at the size of the transmission build out is just absolutely critical. So thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Abe.
We're getting a little distortion on your microphone. The suggestion was if you can turn it off and turn it back on again, that might clear it up. So just going to check with you on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. Sue, can I turn things over to you?
Okay, great. Let me just sound check. You can hear me okay?
Yes. Great.
Right.
Thank you.
So first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to be on this panel. As everyone has already acknowledged, it's very timely and certainly it's with where PJM is and what we're working on. on a number of different fronts. I mean, all these discussions are very relevant. We are, as you all know, PJM is a multi-state RTO, and so in doing that, we have to be able to develop our planning process as well as our market processes to meet all the needs of different states' goals and targets. But that being said, you know, we recognize that the world is moving generally towards decarbonization. And so while PJM is technology neutral, fuel neutral, we see that it's happening, and we know that our processes have to be able to meet those changes and the evolution of the fuel mix that's in the PJM region. And certainly I will make a shout out to Abe and his team at New Jersey. You know, one of the ways that we can do that is through the state agreement approach, and New Jersey has chosen to move forward with that. And that process, as it has been, first one out of the gate, so to speak, there's been a lot of lessons learned. There's needed to be a lot of cooperation, a lot of exchanging to make sure that what we're doing meets that state's needs. And we would like to see that this becomes, you know, perhaps a role model or a template should other states want to move forward, either individually or collectively. And we think that this process is, you know, it does recognize the importance of cost, because when you build transmission, there's no question, it's very expensive. It takes a lot of time to build. There's a lot of impacts, and and I think many of you also heard the comments about from Mark Christie earlier about the State Commission and the role that they need to determine in the whole siting process, and how it all really works together. So PJM, yes, I'm sure many people are familiar also with, you know, our recognition of costs in terms of the wholesale market. The other area where PJM plays a really significant role in recognizing the importance of costs is through our competitive transmission planning process, which we are using in the New Jersey solicitation. So this is a process that you know, PJM's implemented back in 2014 or so with Order 1000, and each year we've been refining and improving on that process to make it more effective, so that I believe it's an ideal vehicle to really solicit transmission solutions in the case of New Jersey solicitation. So we're very excited about it. We're welcoming this opportunity, and we would like to obviously continue to refine this. We're very encouraged by FERC's interest as well in the same department to really work with the states and with the RTOs to figure out, you know, what do we need to do to move forward with the transmission development cost effectively, efficiently, and of course timely, to make sure that we maintain the reliability of the system.
Thanks, Sue. Jennifer, any opening remarks you'd like to share?
Well, thank you. First, thank you very much for having me here. I'm very excited to participate in this panel and in this whole discussion. I won't repeat what everyone else has said about what a unique and exciting time this is for not only transmission, but collaboration and just in the energy sector in general. I will note, like Sue was saying about how many states that PJM represents and works with, I represent all the states and the territories. So I'll note that unless I'm talking about NARUC policy, any opinions expressed are my own, don't represent any state commission or individual commissioners or commissions. But I'm very excited about being here today and moving forward with this discussion. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. And before I dive into some questions, I do want to just note that there are FERC staffers participating in this discussion this morning. So just remind you that we shouldn't be discussing any contested proceedings that are currently pending at FERC. Just a reminder. Okay, so I think, Jennifer, I may start with you. Specifically, as we talk about this topic of federal and state collaboration. Last month, FERC issued an order establishing a first of its kind task force, a joint federal and state task force on transmission issues. The task force is going to be comprised of FERC commissioners, as well as, I believe, 10 state commissioners nominated by NARUC. So in your role with NARUC, maybe you could give us some flavor about what you think that task force is going to be looking like, what you're hoping to achieve from that task force, and what the next steps are. You know, since this is all new, you know, when I saw that, I was scratching my head a little bit about, you know, how this was all going to work and what it was going to mean. So any light that you can shed on that and share with us would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Yes, we're very excited about the federal joint federal state task force. And I actually thought it was great that, first of all, I was very pleased to have Commissioner Mark Christie speak as the keynote speaker for this. And he made a lot of the points I would like to make regarding state authority and where states are coming from. And that just warms my heart. But I also thought it was important that he started off with a quote from Winston Churchill about how talk is better than fight. And that's sort of how the genesis of this task force came about. As you may know, we have been through some battles recently with FERC about how we're approaching issues that were the line between state and federal jurisdiction. You know, it's blurry, it's jagged, it's just anything but clear. And so this was sort of an opportunity for us to come together and kind of get ahead of that, you know, do some more talking before we got to the fighting. And we thought it was important to establish a formal structure to do this in. I mean, it predated my time at NARUC, but supposedly there was this thing called FERC Church at the NARUC meetings where FERC commissioners would try to talk to state regulators. I see Abe nodding that he might have been part of that. But it didn't seem as productive, and there were issues about ex parte communications and litigation. So we sort of decided to move in the other direction and, like, let's make something formal. The Federal Power Act Section 209 provides for this. Let's use this authority to see if we can make something happen. And so I think what where the NARUC is really looking for is an opportunity to talk to the state, to the FERC commissioners in a way that we can share our experiences and the unique things that happen that you see from the ground that you may not see from the federal perspective, and share those experiences in a way that can inform the policy process to produce better results. So that if they knew this information ahead of time, or we could talk it out, or they could ask questions, maybe we could, you know, shape what is coming out later. And so I think that was particularly important for us. And yeah, so as you know, the first step was that we, from NARUC's side, was that we filed a submission of our nominees last week. And so the next step will be for FERC to appoint the nominees to the task force and then set the date and time for the first meeting. It was said in the order that it would be fall 2021. We mentioned at the NARUC meeting last week, and for those of you who weren't there, that we're actually looking at co-locating it with the NARUC annual meeting in November. So the first week of November, like the 7th through the 11th timeframe. We haven't settled on a date yet. And so that will be an opportunity for stakeholders and the task force to meet and to kick off the process. And yes, that'll be the next steps in the process. And I think FERC will be soliciting agenda topics after they announce the date and time. And it'll be an opportunity for states who and commissioners who are on the task force and those who are not to submit agenda items for the task force.
Okay, so that there's no prescribed timeline at this point for any specific actions. It's more kind of creating an opportunity, sort of a formalized opportunity for dialogue, is what it sounds like.
Yes, and actually, I mean, I think it's a really important point that there are a lot of things happening right now. So as you mentioned, there's the ANOPR, there's this task force. Abe and Sue are going to talk about the state agreement process, which FERC is, you know, has explicitly told us to make sure that states understand that they don't want to stand in the way of any of those things happening while we do this task force. This task force is not, it's supposed to supplement and complement these processes, and it's not supposed to get in the way of any of them.
Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. You know, I've one quick question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Abe and Sue for their thoughts about this task force as well. But you know, when we think about, so there are going to be 10 state commissions represented. is it fair to say, or you know, when I've thought about this, and I've seen this play out in, for example, transmission cost allocation battles, where you've got one state battling against another state. Is it appropriate to view this to view the states as kind of a monolithic entity here for purposes of this dialogue, or I mean, I assume that obviously there is some commonality of interest on certain topics, but then there are areas where states diverge. I mean, if you look at, you know, within PJM, and Sue is obviously very aware of this with the 13 states, you've got, you know, certain states that you know, have very strong decarbonization agendas and others do not. So, you know, how do you see that dynamic playing out on this task force, recognizing that the states themselves may not always be in agreement on certain fundamental issues?
Yes, well, thanks for the question. I actually think it's very important not to view us as a monolith. I think that's actually the whole point, and that's one of the things that in a lot of the filings that NARUC makes is that we try to make the point that the experiences for states are very different and they're very individualized. And I think the point of the task force is to give the FERC commissioners or work with them to make sure they understand the whole range, the variety of experiences, and the reason that there needs to be flexibility and differences is because they're not all the same, and that they need to be able to address different things in different ways. And as you may know, when we nominated them, we were charged with nominating based on the 5 NARUC regions. So not only are they're just not 10 state commissioners representing their states, they're also representing their regions, and we have tasked them to specifically make outreach to their fellow members in those regions to see what, you know, what issues should be represented at a regional level, and what, you know, and states are going to be able to participate even if they're not on the task force at an individual level, to file comments before and after meetings and such, to really make sure that FERC understands that, you know, it's not one size fits all. It's not one solution that's going to achieve the best results for everyone. So I think it's important not to think of us as a monolith. Although where we can find commonalities, that would be great, and where we can come to consensus. And I also think we recognize when we were establishing the task force that this may have to be an iterative process. So we started off with a task force that represents the entire country, and we're talking about issues very broadly. But, you know, at least I personally imagine that perhaps in the future, there's going to have to be a break off, and, you know, maybe there'll be regional discussions and such. And so, and there was, in the order, I believe there's mention of regional meetings, so that you can kind of dive deeper into what each region is looking at. Because, you know, the issues in the West are nothing like the issues in the East. I mean, they're just not the same. You don't have the same number of RTOs, you don't have the same number of resources and load distribution and all of that. And that needs to be taken into account. But we had to start somewhere, so we started with a broad task force, and you know, I'm really hoping that we will give it the time and the space to see what we can accomplish and push it out, and remain optimistic about it.
Great, thanks. Abe, Sue, I'll let you jump in, comment, you know, any thoughts, views you may have on this task force, and what it should be focusing on, or what, you know, what are some opportunities and also some challenges associated with the task force?
Well, I'm going to defer to Abe to answer this one first.
Okay.
Because he is.
I was going to defer to you. No, I think what Jennifer says is totally true. I mean, you know, we could have 50 different states, each with their own flavor of transmission planning. And I think the interesting breakdown is going to be, you have the states who have aggressive clean energy mandates, and you have those who have less aggressive clean energy mandates. And I have to tell you, I mean, listening to Commissioner Christie this morning and reading the ANOPR as well, you know, the sort of slightly provocative question that kept popping into my head is, are there state public policies that can be confined to a single state? Can you meet your state public policies? Can you get to your 100% clean energy standard, you know,
right,
without having coordination and looking across state lines? And the answer is no, of course you can't. So then we get into, you know, this question of, okay, so let's just sort of all accept that there will be, you know, multiple states having to coordinate on meeting these clean energy goals. How do we do it in the least cost manner? How do we do it? How do we think about transmission expansion? I mean, you know, I know we're going to get to it in a minute, but as you think about the offshore grid, offshore wind transmission grid that New Jersey is currently contemplating, I have no doubt that in 10 years, 20 years, whatever the time is, that piece of the offshore grid that we're contemplating building will be part of a larger regional network that will cross both state lines and probably ISO lines. I mean, I don't know anybody who seriously thinks about these things who doesn't think that by 2050, say at the outside, we will have a Florida to Maine offshore wind backbone of some kind. And so as we sort of move and take that first mover step along with PJM, New Jersey ratepayers are volunteering to pay that, those upfront costs. But as that becomes part of a larger grid, we really need to very carefully think about how those costs are allocated and make sure that we don't penalize, states that move first and take these aggressive actions by, sort of saying, oh, okay, thank you, New Jersey, you built this line, spent, whatever billions of dollars to do it, and now everybody else is going to be a free rider on that line, right? That's exactly the opposite of productive transmission policy. But at the same time, we also recognize that obviously things that New Jersey does and our clean energy policies are going to affect the flows on the PJM system. And I'm here to say I think that's okay. But different states are obviously going to look at that and have their own put their own veneer on it.
Okay, thanks. So I think you've teed up where I'm going to go next, which both you and Sue have mentioned, which is this PJM first of its kind state agreement approach, public policy, open window process to procure transmission to enable the state of New Jersey to meet its very aggressive offshore wind generation goals. So for the two of you, kind of drilling down a little bit into that, how are you both viewing the split of responsibilities here between, PJM in the past has run reliability open windows, market efficiency windows. This is the first public policy window, which the state of New Jersey initiated. What are the respective roles of PJM, which is obviously a FERC approved RTO, and the BPU? What lessons have you maybe already learned that you might be willing to share? I mean, obviously we're still in the middle of the window process. The window hasn't closed yet. There's a lot that's still going to happen. But for everyone listening, since this is kind of first out of the gate, be interested in having you share any lessons learned. And then how do you see this process playing out over the next several months?
Okay, yeah, I'll start off, and then I'm sure Abe will have a lot more to add as well. So first of all, let me just start by saying, the state agreement approach is written very intentionally broad, and so it's designed so that it can accommodate essentially, a wide range of public policies. So that being said, when you look at our tariff and governing documents, there's not a lot of detail about exactly how we roll this out. So which has presented the challenge. So I will tell you that's probably been one of the first lessons learned is how to translate the public policy into our much more defined RTEP process. And because this particular policy touches on generation resources, how does that interact with the interconnection process, which is also fairly structured and defined, and again, also the subject of the ANOPR. So, in terms of, what is PJM doing? So the first part is making sure that we understand what the public policy is. What does that mean in terms of an RTEP planning process? How do we take that and present that out to stakeholders so that they can, determine what transmission is needed? So that was a very collaborative process. We had a lot of discussions with New Jersey and various team members on their behalf to basically between us understand, explain how our process works, how our modeling works, make sure they understand how that would then play out with the resources, and then actually perform all the studies. So a lot of work went on really also behind the scenes even before we reached the point where we were ready to open a competitive window. one of the key responsibilities for PJM is actually to do all that work that would conduct that window, to solicit the transmission solutions and to make sure that we are assuring the reliability of the grid while still meeting whatever those public policy needs are. For those familiar with the window, you know that it is still open. There's a lot of work that went into getting the window open, getting all those documents. It's a much more expansive solicitation than we have done in the past, which has presented a number of challenges in itself. I will say another lesson learned is in terms of the amount of questions we've gotten. We certainly anticipated a lot. It has exceeded my expectations. On the plus side, I think the interest in the window is exceeding my expectations. So it's very encouraging. There's a lot of developers out there based on the types of questions that they have come to us with, so that we expect a lot of really good response when this window closes. And I'll just add maybe one other item that I thought was significant, and that was, when we got this request from New Jersey, together we worked to put together a study agreement very quickly to get that to explain not only to FERC, but to all other stakeholders what we're doing, what's the timeline, what are the expectations here, and so that it makes it a lot more transparent to everybody that might be affected by this process.
Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, I know my mic cut out a little bit earlier, but hopefully Sue heard all the nice things I said about PJM. I feel like we have done everything but have Thanksgiving dinner together. And, if I have a lesson learned from the SAA project, it's that transmission is really hard. And, when we're basically creating a process from scratch, there are a lot of issues, like how do you make this forward compatible? How do you deal with some of the cost allocation issues? How do you deal with the fact that we're talking about building transmission that's specifically for offshore wind? And, one of the really exciting things about the state agreement approach, and I really do, commend PJM for having an open mind on this, is that we came in and we talked about sort of traditional onshore upgrades, and just like you would for almost any other generator interconnection project. But we're also talking about potentially taking the grid offshore and building, a real backbone in the ocean. And that's something I think is really new and very exciting for all of us. I mean, I think this is probably the coolest project I've ever worked on in my career. And, so we expect coming out of the SAAQ window process that we will have people recommending onshore upgrades. We will have people recommending upgrades to get the power from the ocean to the shore. And then we'll also have sort of, a real network proposals. And I have to say, I mean, to me, this is really emphasizes the benefits of competition in transmission, because we are getting, incredibly good questions. Private capital is being invested. There's a lot of development spend going into making this work. And so when I look at that, I really do think this is great. I mean, we are having some of the best minds in transmission working on this project, and, both at the PJM and at the private sector. And I always hope that, there is DOE, FERC, the federal government, the new ocean ISO, that may have to be created, whatever entity that is, that does the sort of real planning for a cohesive offshore wind along the East Coast, can really look at this process and say, okay, this is what we need to do, except we need to do it, in 12 different states and in 3 different ISOs. But as a model for how to work collaboratively between state and federal regulators or PJM regional grid operators, I think this has just been a fabulous process. And of course, we'll have to see what comes out. I mean, we are all very excited to see what actually gets submitted. I think it's August 30th is the due date, at which point the real work begins of looking through, what I anticipate will be dozens of permutations of really exciting, really creative ways of bringing offshore wind to New Jersey consumers on schedule and at a lower cost than we could get if we were just doing it through the normal processes.
Okay, there are lots of, it is fascinating. So many interesting issues raised. And, on this topic of coordination and collaboration, what we've seen, and this is just focusing on, building transmission on land, you can have situations where you're coordinating with different, let's say, different federal permitting authorities. And this seems to would play out in spades here. So you talked about it. You're talking about the, and the scope of the RFP is broad, covering both onshore and offshore upgrades, which could include building a collector station, building an actual backbone in the outer continental shelf. So what kind of coordination do you envision, let's say, with BOEM? And how is that going to work in the bids? For example, as you're evaluating constructability and permitting risks and challenges, I'm curious how you're going to overlay that federal coordination aspect onto this, onto this open window process.
Okay. So Jodi, you brought up BOEM, and you're right. That's another layer of potential permitting approvals that will be needed, and it is different than many of the others that we have experience with. But I will say that we've evaluated many projects that have had to go through different either environmental permits, processes, siting, local jurisdiction type approvals. So there is a lot of experience with evaluating projects that have these risks, things that they have to do, and that could basically either delay the project or prevent it from occurring. So while BOEM is another one that we haven't had as much with, we do think that yes, it's a consideration. We see that the federal government is certainly very supportive of offshore wind, so that I think will play in favor of supporting whatever process needs to move those project evaluation along so that they can get built.
Okay, I do think that it's going to be very interesting how this plays out. Abe is smiling, but I just have a feeling that it's going to be very interesting, as the NEPA rules are in flux. We've got to change, federal administration and how the NEPA rules get, potentially get applied to BOEM and leases and, underwater cables out in the ocean. It'll be very interesting, but I, commend both PJM and the BPU for tackling this and doing it with such enthusiasm. So I guess stay tuned on that. I want to sort of maybe take this up a layer and talk about we've touched on the ANOPR, as did the previous panel, and obviously FERC has offered up a lot for all of us in the industry to think about going forward. One of the key issues that FERC has teed up, is this concept of where are the lines of responsibility and authority between FERC and the states in the area of transmission planning and cost allocation. FERC, is seeking comment on how to ensure, they use the quote, appropriate vetting of transmission infrastructure. And Abe, you raised this, earlier in your discussion about costs and cost effectiveness. And I think for all three of you, I'd like to get your thoughts on your views on where the respective lines of authority with respect to transmission planning fall, and how best to define them consistent with legal precedent, and what the term appropriate vetting means to each of you. And I know that's kind of a loaded question, and there were a lot of sub questions built into that, but I know it's something that I'm thinking a lot about. We're all Wires, and the Wires members are thinking a lot about, and as we go forward into a world where I think everyone agrees that there is significant amounts of new transmission that need to be built, and so the question is how best to do that. Obviously, making sure that the investments are cost effective, but how do we get that done to advance both the federal and the state decarbonization agendas? So with that, I'll turn it over to all of you to kind of ponder those questions and share your thoughts with the audience. Whomever wants to jump in first.
All right, so maybe I'll start, even though I'm not with the state. So PJM, we don't make policy. So let me start with that. That's not our role. But rather, we implement policy. Oh, sorry, my cat. I wanted to get into the show there. So we're a policy taker per se, but that also recognizes that while we're that policy, we're regulated by FERC, so we have to carry out the policies and the rules that FERC puts in place. But transmission is subject to siting and other state rules, and so how do we balance that is really through the processes that we have today, where we may determine through all the analysis, what transmission is needed in terms of our reliability, NEET criteria, NERC criteria, market efficiency, and we would add that to our expansion planning. But then it would ultimately be whoever the developer is, that transmission owner, whether it's incumbent or non-incumbent, they're now going to have to work through whatever applicable state process that is, which will vary from different states. And we recognize that, and that's the reason our process, when you look at the transmission, even the entity that gets designated, it's clearly subject to a whole host of things, a key one, which is the state approval. So we're not here to say where the line should or shouldn't, but we recognize that these are all part of the processes, and that's how we would roll out our plans to make sure that we're meeting what FERC's rules are, and we're meeting what states' rules and needs are.
Jennifer, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I would like to take the opportunity to second something that Commissioner Christie was talking about state authority. And first of all, I really was pleased that he was talking about how it's a myth that states are the ones that are slowing down or stopping the infrastructure development. And I also want to say, so there's efforts in Congress to increase the backstop siting authority for the federal government. And I think he was making a really good point that's really imprudent. That's, as federal regulators, they don't know the state laws and the state circumstances better than the states do. And so to impose, to have the federal government override a decision in that case, that would be, I think, very detrimental, not only to the process, but to the public interest in general. I mean, currently the law is that, backstop siting goes into place when a state hasn't taken action or they've conditioned the approval too much. But now the proposals are that if the state doesn't approve the project, the federal government would be able to step in. And I think that's really wrong. And, NARUC is currently fighting we're opposing that on the Hill. And I just think that it's important to listen to state regulators like, former, Commissioner Christie was a former state regulator, and the ones that we have on the task force and others that they really, if they're not approving it, then there's not a need, or there's some other reason that it's not in the public interest, that they shouldn't give this approval. And I think that's a line that needs to be held. I also think that I would hope that, in this process of having the task force and talking about the voluntary agreements and such, that we maybe can move away from lines of authority into areas of cooperation. Like I've noticed that I came from a state commission, and in Massachusetts, and I worked with ISO New England on market issues and such. And when I came to NARUC, I was like, great, I understand state commissions and I understand ISOs. No, I understand one state commission, I understand partly one ISO. And I know that there are different agreements and different ways that RTOs and ISOs take into account state perspectives and state input into the planning processes. And I would really like to see a way for sort of kind of more lessons learned and best practices to be shared, because the ISO RTOs evolve differently at different times and they put different things in places. And I think there's been a lot of learning and experimenting that has happened. And I know everyone's busy and they don't have time to necessarily do a survey of what's happening in all the other RTOs, ISOs. So maybe we're at a juncture now where we can say, okay, this has worked. This is, I think this example of, what New Jersey is doing with PJM is excellent, and that's a story that needs to be shared. And I think there were other examples where maybe moving away from the strict, not that I want to give up any state authority, I'm not want to be quoted as that, but that we maybe can move to areas of cooperation instead.
Yeah, and I'm just so struck by watching the infrastructure bill in DC as a just interested observer. There's no such thing as one party infrastructure, and there's no such thing as one state infrastructure either. Especially when we talk about transmission. I mean, you've got to start talking about regional things. And it's been so interesting. I mean, I could not listen to Commissioner Christie this morning without thinking about the brief that was recently filed in the Transource 9A case in Pennsylvania. Whether a state commission has the right to reject a proposed transmission line that PJM says is necessary for reliability. That's a really profound question. And I think it's no accident that Commissioner Christie was going through and discussing the history of the cases he was, and I'm sure that was part of one of the things he was thinking about. But I just want to come back to the cooperation angle. I mean, it is so true. New Jersey could not really contemplate seriously the kind of transmission first approach to offshore wind transmission without cooperation from PJM. And we're lucky in a way this is an easy case because it predominantly affects New Jersey, and doesn't necessarily have to cross a lot of other states. But I'm also very cautious, and I was really glad to see the ANOPR teeing up this issue. I mean, if you have, I'm only going to say flyover because Commissioner Christie said it earlier, but if you have a flyover state, if you have a state over here that needs clean energy and you have a state over here that's generating the clean energy because they have the resource, and you have a state sort of stuck in the middle, what do you do about that scenario? You tell state, the state that wants the clean energy, and certainly in New Jersey's case, we have a legislative and gubernatorial mandate to get that clean energy. That nope, sorry, you can't meet your state policies in an affordable manner because that state in the middle wants to block the transmission. That also is not the right answer. I think at some level, I have to agree with Jennifer. Talking about lines of responsibility, to me, that reads like a Supreme Court case, at which point we've just wasted 5 years of not actually building transmission. Instead, we're all going to the Supreme Court and we'll find out what the answer is, and no one will be happy. So I definitely think meeting our clean energy targets and meeting our transmission needs really does have to be everyone holding hands, sweaty palms and all, and then jumping together. And that's really the only way at the end of the day that this will work.
Thank you, Abe. I think that's actually a good segue into my next question. We're talking about everyone sort of jumping in together, and also this notion of litigation and constantly being in litigation. Speaking as a transmission owner representative in PJM, there's been tremendous amount of litigation over the last several years about cost allocation for certain projects. We're still in cost allocation at FERC, at the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. It's pitted states against each other, to some extent pitted transmission owners against each other, and is potentially an impediment to getting transmission planned and built. And this is another topic that FERC has teed up in the ANOPR, and it seems like really everything is on the table in that rulemaking. So interested in your thoughts, to the extent that you want to share them, on how, if you had, the power to sort of make these cost allocation rules going forward, and recognizing that there are, legal issues and parameters and all of that to deal with, what would you like to see in the area of cost allocation, and would you, as from, at least from the state perspective, support potentially more regionalization of costs going forward? Just interested in your views.
I'll just make it really quick, which is I'm going to beat the cooperation drum again. And I look at what MISO did with their MVP projects. The cost allocation wasn't right. It wasn't right. but everybody agreed to it and it got done. And of all the things that feel intractable to me, cost allocation is probably the one that scares me the most, because there is so much money at stake. Somebody's going to litigate it. And in the meantime, it makes it very difficult for states like New Jersey to make the investments in transmission that we would like to make. I mean, when I sort of think about, okay, what gets me fired from my job? What makes us look really bad in 5 or 10 years? It's the idea that New Jersey would spend a lot of money up front to do a lot of transmission, which I think is prudent in sort of an overall social welfare sense, because it would reduce the cost of doing all these things sort of sequentially. And then having spent all this money, sunk these costs, other states come in and other consumers come in and free ride without contributing. And that's the piece of it that really, feels very, very difficult to do. So I like the idea of people getting together. I know I was cutting out a little bit in my intro remarks, but the ESIG process, so you'll have to remind me what that actually stands for. But this was the study where PJM looked at all the RPS requirements for all the states in PJM and said, okay, what do we need to do to actually make this work? What does the transmission system have to look like? And, I think we're coming in a rich tradition of places like MISO. I think it started with the MBOS analysis that eventually became the MVP project a number of years ago. And that's the kind of cooperative process that we need, where every state comes together and says, okay, we can live with some grand compromise. And I frankly think that is the path forward, rather than, just endless litigation. And I sort of hope that FERC is going to lead that kind of conversation, and that this joint NARUC FERC board will help with
that. That's an interesting thought, Abe. Jennifer, do you see that as something that this task force would wade into, and trying to sort of get some type of agreement or approach in terms of how to address cost allocation going forward?
Yes, I mean, I would certainly be hopeful that could be something that happens out of this process. I mean, it's actually really good timing. They've teed up this ANOPR. The comments are due October 12th. The first meeting of the task force will be early November. That'll be a chance for them to actually sit across the table from each other and start talking it out and start seeing in a way that I know Commissioner Christie mentioned the possibility of technical conferences and such, and I'm hoping this kind of takes a technical conference and moves it another step forward to more of a back and forth, more of a conversation, and it really gives them an opportunity to see where they can go with this. And at some point there may be issues where there's not going to be agreement, and there just have to be agreement to just agree to disagree on certain aspects. But I'm really hoping that there'll be opportunities for common understanding and a way to just talk it out. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would say, we are also really, I think, encouraged by these discussions too between the FERC and states, because at the end of the day, we have to carry out whatever, cost allocation, is ultimately approved by FERC. But we're reliant really on the states having that voice at FERC to explain, how this affects them, what's valuable, what works and what doesn't work. I would say we were also encouraged because PJM, even prior to the ANOPR, we had already embarked on 2 critical stakeholder discussions with regarding that would impact cost. One is our Interconnection Reform Task Force, which is perhaps a little bit more tactical, but does touch onto the cost allocation policy and how, let's say, customers would or would not pay. But at an even broader level is our interconnection policy workshops. And that's where we're teeing up these different concepts to get others more engaged. And so we're really optimistic that between the discussions that we're having in the PJM arena that are also going to be continued through the ANOPR to really to get FERC to look at the policies and try to address the diversity of interest between the different states and the other participants. So we're optimistic. Maybe I hope we're not overly optimistic because we have a lot of work in front of us. So this is a critical one. We would certainly like to avoid endless litigation as well. It's very consuming of resources and energy and distracting from what the real goal is, which is ensuring that we have the transmission that we need. So
I think we all agree on that. I'm going to ask one last question before I turn this over back to Larry, and it's on the issue of how you define the term cost effective when talking about transmission projects. And Abe, in your opening remarks, you talked about kind of guarding against. I think you've used the phrase excessive costs associated with transmission. When I think about transmission, I think this be true for any major infrastructure investment, that you're doing a cost benefit analysis, and obviously looking at the benefits of transmission and the value that transmission brings, including reduced congestion costs and all the reliability and resilience benefits associated with it. But then obviously building it in a cost-effective way, and one that clearly has in mind what the ultimate cost is going to be to customers over the life of the asset, and these are long-lived assets. So I would just maybe you could all just spend a minute talking about what how you would be evaluating cost effectiveness going forward.
Well, I can start off with that one, and there's two answers. One is high level, at least for New Jersey, and I understand not every state is going to agree with this. It has to take into account environmental externalities, carbon being first and foremost, obviously. And when we look at cost effectiveness here in New Jersey, we see everything through the lens of we need to decarbonize our economy, right? I mean, that almost sounds trite these days, like some anodyne corporate talking point, but it's true. And we look at the effect of our policies on carbon both here in New Jersey and across the PJM footprint. We generally draw the line at the edge of PJM. But so when we think about what makes a good transmission investment, we absolutely look at the environmental piece of it. But cost is really, really important too. And there are so many structures for building transmission. And it's not always cheapest to have the incumbent TOs do it with their cost of capital and return on investment. And we just need to, as an industry, there is enough work here for everyone to make a very healthy business model for the next multiple decades. But if people get greedy about it, it just means we're going to build less transmission because we have to do these things cost effectively. Going back to the panel before us, really interesting discussion about transmission versus distributed energy resources. And of course, the answer is it's going to be a combination of both. And I think we're increasingly going to see distribution resources bringing some cost discipline to transmission. Because at the end of the day, New Jersey is relatively indifferent. In fact, our consumers probably like distributed resources more than large central stations. So if we have both these levers we can pull, and we're going to do the one that's most cost effective. So when we look at any individual transmission line, we want to see competition. We want to see the market saying, no, I can do this at a lower cost. And we also want cost discipline from our utilities, including making sure that rates of return are reasonable and that we're not substituting, capital from utilities at very high cost for capital that can be raised on a less expensive basis from the market. And so, it's a very individualistic analysis, but it's something that we spend a lot of time looking at and thinking about and watching quite closely.
Thanks, Dave. I don't know if Sue or Jennifer have anything to add to that. I know we're just about out of time.
I think Abe captured it.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Larry, I'm going to turn this back over to you, but I do want to thank Abe, Jennifer, and Sue for sharing their thoughts. I feel like I definitely learned something and really enjoyed the dialogue.
Great panel. Thank you very much.
You.
Yeah, let me pick up on that and thank you, Jodi, for moderating this panel, and thank Sue and Jennifer and Abe for participating. I know when the two FERC orders came out in June, for those of us who hadn't directly been involved in some of those issues, there was a lot of wondering what's going on here. what is this all about? What could it lead to? So I think this is really helpful to hear some of what the experience was within PJM and with New Jersey on the state voluntary agreements. And Jennifer, really appreciate your insights, and yours, Abe, and Sue as well, on what we may be seeing out of this joint federal state task force. Clearly some really challenging issues, I think, to be worked through in the federal and state arena on transmission. So a lot more to be played as we go forward on it. But thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for attending today's summer meeting. I want everyone to be aware that our next meeting is going to be on October 28th. We're hoping to have that one. We are planning to have that one as an in-person meeting in DC at the Willard Hotel. So mark your calendars. Hope everybody who has been joining us for these virtual meetings will now be able to participate in person at one coming up in October, where we already know our featured keynote speaker for that meeting is going to be FERC Commissioner Allison Clements. So something to look forward to. Thank everybody for attending today's meeting, and look forward to seeing you at the October meeting in the next couple of months. Thank you very much. Bye now.